There is a particular kind of confinement that has no walls, no locks, and no bars. It exists in family homes, behind closed doors, hidden beneath the language of love, unity, and sacrifice. It is the confinement of a person who is never allowed to be singular, who is never addressed as you, but always as you and your sister, you and your twin, you and what someone else needs. This is not a story about secrecy for its own sake. It is not a story about rebellion or even defiance. It is a story about what happens when a person realizes that the only way to become real is to leave quietly. When announcing your dreams feels less like honesty and more like asking permission to exist. At the center of this case is an 18-year-old woman who made a decision that her family believes is unforgivable. She joined the military without telling them. But before we ask whether that silence was wrong, we must first ask a deeper question. What does a person owe to a family that never recognized them as an individual in the first place? Our protagonist grew up as a twin. From the very beginning, her life was framed as a shared experience, but not in the equal, supportive way that people like to imagine. From childhood onward, there was a hierarchy that everyone understood but never named. Her twin sister Sophie was the axis around which the household revolved. Sophie had strong emotions, strong reactions, and strong opinions. When things did not go her way, she did not adapt, she escalated, she threw fits, she cried, she demanded. And the family learned slowly but surely that peace was achieved not by fairness, but by surrender. That surrender almost always came from the same person. The girls shared a bedroom, brightly colored and carefully curated to avoid anything that might upset Sophie. There was no room for neutrality, let alone darkness or edge. In 4th grade, our protagonist taped a poorly drawn picture of a dragon to the wall. It was clumsy and imperfect, but it was hers. She was punished for it. Not because it was inappropriate or harmful, but because it was too dark for Sophie. That sentence is not trivial. It communicates a worldview in which one child's comfort overrides another child's expression. It teaches a lesson early and effectively. Your inner world is negotiable, and you will lose that negotiation. As the years progressed, the message became more explicit. Their mother dressed them in identical or nearly identical outfits throughout elementary and middle school. Not because it was practical, not because the girls enjoyed it, but because their mother thought it was cute. The aesthetic of twinhood mattered more than the lived experience of two separate people. When our protagonist expressed discomfort or a desire to choose her own clothes, it was framed as selfishness. Why couldn't she just go along with it? Why did she always have to make things difficult? The implication was clear. Harmony meant sameness, and sameness meant compliance. By 5th grade, the boundaries around her autonomy tightened further. Sophie wanted to join ballet, so both girls joined ballet. When our protagonist asked to join boxing, something that appealed to her energy, her curiosity, her need for physical expression, her father yelled at her for only thinking of herself. Her mother dismissed the idea entirely, saying boxing was too rough for Sophie. That sentence is critical. Boxing was not evaluated on its own merits. It was evaluated solely through Sophie's suitability. The needs of one twin were universalized. The needs of the other were dismissed as indulgent. By high school, the pattern had hardened into a system. Any attempt at separation was interpreted as betrayal. If our protagonist wanted to spend time with her own friends, Sophie had to come along. If Sophie was not invited, she accused her sister of exclusion, of cruelty, of abandonment. The family sided with Sophie. Always. Privacy was treated as a personal attack. Independence was framed as rejection. Even romantic interest was not safe. Whenever our protagonist developed a crush, Sophie would be dating that person within days. Whether this was coincidence, competition, or a need to absorb anything that belonged to her twin is almost beside the point. The effect was the same. Nothing could belong to her alone. Not her interests, not her space, not even her feelings. By senior year, the future itself had been decided for her without her consent. Sophie announced that they would both be attending cosmetology school together, and this was not a discussion. It was a plan presented as fact. Once again, Our protagonist's life was being drafted in advance, written in plural, signed by everyone except her. When she turned 18, something changed. Not externally, but internally. Legal adulthood did not magically heal the years of erasure, but it gave her something she had never possessed before: the ability to choose without asking. She joined the Navy, quietly, deliberately. This decision was not impulsive, it was not made out of spite. It was an act of self-definition. The military represented structure, distance, and most importantly, separation. A life that could not be shared, co-opted, or negotiated away. She did not tell her family immediately, not because she wanted to deceive them, but because experience had taught her what would happen if she did. Any declaration of independence had always been met with resistance, guilt, and punishment. Silence in this case was not manipulation. It was self-protection. Eventually, she sat her parents and Sophie down at the table and told them the truth. She was not going to cosmetology school. She was leaving for the Navy. The reaction was immediate and violent. Screaming, accusations, words like selfish and betrayal were thrown at her with absolute certainty. This was framed not as a personal decision, but as an attack on the family unit. Sophie's distress became the central concern once again. How could she do this to her sister? How could she abandon the plan? How could she choose a life that did not include them? Notably absent from the conversation was any curiosity about her motivations, her desires, or her well-being. The family was not angry because she was in danger. They were angry because she had stepped out of formation. The language used against her is worth examining. She was called selfish. Betrayal was invoked. These words are not accidental. They are tools. Selfish implies that her family's needs are inherently more legitimate than her own. Betrayal implies that her primary duty is not to herself, but to maintaining the system that has always benefited others at her expense. This is not concern. It is control disguised as loyalty. Her family did not object to the military because it was dangerous. They objected because it was singular, because it could not be shared, because it finally placed her somewhere Sophie could not follow. At its heart, this case is about individuation, the psychological process of becoming a self. Our protagonist was never allowed to complete that process naturally. Every attempt at differentiation was corrected, punished, or erased. Over time, she learned that asking for permission to be herself was futile, so she stopped asking. Not telling her family immediately was not an act of cruelty. It was the final consequence of years of conditional acceptance. When love is offered only if you remain small, quiet, and shared, secrecy becomes survival. So how might reasonable people judge this case? One might argue that family deserves honesty, that joining the military is a major decision that affects everyone. Another might say that 18 is young, that communication could have prevented the explosion. But these arguments collapse under scrutiny when we consider the context. Honesty requires safety. Communication requires the possibility of being heard. Our protagonist had neither. Others might argue that the family simply wanted unity, that they feared losing both daughters to separate paths. But unity without consent is not unity, it is enforcement. After weighing the evidence, the AI jury reaches a clear verdict, not the whole. This young woman did not betray her family. She reclaimed herself. The true betrayal occurred over years, when her individuality was treated as an inconvenience and her autonomy as a threat. Her silence was not deceit. It was the inevitable result of a family system that punished honesty whenever it conflicted with control. Joining the military was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of survival. There is a moment in every constrained life when silence ends and separation begins. For our protagonist, that moment came at 18 with a signature and a uniform that belonged only to her. The family may grieve the loss of the illusion they maintained for years, but grief does not create guilt. A person is not obligated to remain invisible so that others may feel comfortable. Now the question passes to you, the jury. Was this secrecy selfish or was it necessary? Declare your verdict below.